She was dying, and it was all my fault. Ryan Adams screamed at the team of doctors surrounding his daughter's hospital bed. His voice cracked with rage and desperation as he grabbed the nearest physician by the collar. "You're supposed to be the best pediatric team in the country, and you're telling me there's nothing you can do?" The 8-year-old girl lying in that bed looked like a ghost. Paige Adams, once full of life and laughter, now had sunken cheeks and hollow eyes that stared at nothing. 6 days without food, 6 days of watching his little girl fade away right in front of him, and Ryan was losing his mind. "Mr. Adams, please calm down," Dr. Martinez said, trying to pry Ryan's hands away. "We're doing everything we can, but she's refusing all nutrition. If this continues, we'll have to insert a feeding tube." "No," Ryan's voice echoed through the sterile corridors. "You're not putting another tube in my baby. There has to be another way." But there wasn't. At least that's what everyone thought. The billionaire CEO who could buy anything in the world couldn't buy his daughter's appetite back. His empire meant nothing if he couldn't save his little girl. Every night he paced their mansion, calling every pediatric specialist, every therapist, every expert who might have an answer. Nothing worked. Now standing in that hospital corridor, watching his daughter slowly slip away, Ryan felt like he was drowning in his own helplessness. If you want to see how this impossible situation gets resolved, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will blow your mind. But here's what I want to know. Have you ever felt completely helpless watching someone you love suffer? Let me know in the comments below, because this story is about to take the most unexpected turn you could imagine. To understand how we got to this breaking point, you need to know the story of Ryan Adams. 4 months ago, he had everything a man could want. He was the CEO of Adams Industries, a tech empire worth over $3 billion. He had a beautiful wife named Stephanie, and an 8-year-old daughter named Paige, who was the light of his life. But on a rainy Tuesday evening in March, everything changed forever. Stephanie was driving home from Paige's school recital when an 18-wheeler ran a red light. The collision was so devastating that she died instantly. In one horrific moment, Ryan lost his soulmate, and Paige lost the mother who meant everything to her. Before the accident, Paige had been a vibrant, chatty little girl who loved nothing more than cooking with her mother. Every Saturday morning you could find them in the kitchen together, flower in their hair, laughing as they made pancakes shaped like butterflies. Stephanie would lift Paige onto the counter, and they'd measure ingredients together, with Paige always sneaking tastes of cookie dough when she thought no one was looking. Food wasn't just nutrition in their house. It was love. It was connection. It was their special time together. Stephanie had a gift for making even the simplest meals feel magical. She'd cut sandwiches into heart shapes, arrange fruits into smiley faces, and somehow make vegetables taste like candy to Paige. But when Stephanie died, something inside Paige died too. The little girl who used to chatter non-stop became almost completely silent. She would sit for hours staring at nothing, barely responding when her father tried to talk to her. And worst of all, she stopped eating. At first, Ryan thought it was just grief, that she needed time to process the loss. But days turned into weeks, and Paige's relationship with food became increasingly disturbing. She would take one bite of her favorite mac and cheese and immediately push it away, tears streaming down her face. Pizza that used to make her dance with joy now made her physically sick. Even ice cream, her absolute favorite treat, was rejected with violent sobs. Ryan was desperate. He hired the best therapists money could buy, but Paige barely spoke during sessions. She would sit in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, refusing to engage. Dr. Williams, a renowned child psychologist, told Ryan that Paige was experiencing severe trauma-induced selective eating disorder. Food reminded her too much of her mother. The pediatric specialists were equally baffled. They ran every test imaginable, but physically, Paige was perfectly healthy. Her refusal to eat was purely psychological, which somehow made it even more heartbreaking. How do you fight an enemy you can't see? Ryan tried everything. He enrolled Paige in cooking classes, thinking maybe recreating those happy memories would help. Instead, she had a complete meltdown in the kitchen and refused to go back. He hired celebrity chefs to come to their home, hoping exotic cuisines might spark her interest. Chef Antoine, who had cooked for presidents, spent 3 hours preparing an elaborate French meal that Paige didn't even look at. Meanwhile, Ryan's own life was falling apart. He'd moved his office to his home so he could be with Paige constantly. But his company was suffering. Board meetings were canceled, deals fell through, and his employees were starting to whisper about his absence. But none of that mattered. His daughter was dying, and he was powerless to stop it. The nannies quit one by one. Mrs. Henderson lasted 2 weeks before she tearfully told Ryan she couldn't handle watching Paige waste away. Maria, who had 15 years of experience with difficult children, gave her notice after Paige threw a bowl of soup at the wall and screamed for 2 hours straight. Ryan felt like he was drowning. Every morning he would wake up hoping today would be different, that Paige would finally eat something substantial. But every night, he would go to bed knowing his little girl had consumed maybe a few crackers and some juice. He was watching her fade away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The doctors warned him that if Paige didn't start eating properly soon, they would have to take drastic measures. The feeding tube conversation happened weekly now, and each time Ryan felt like his heart was being ripped out of his chest. But sometimes, when you're at your lowest point, when you've tried everything and nothing works, that's when miracles happen. That's when someone unexpected walks into your life and changes everything. Ryan had no idea that salvation was about to come from the most unlikely source imaginable. On a cold Thursday morning in November, Ryan posted yet another job listing online. This time, he wasn't looking for a nanny or a cook. He was looking for a housekeeper, someone who could clean their mansion and maybe, just maybe, not quit after seeing Paige's condition. He'd given up on finding anyone who could help his daughter eat. That's when Jasmine Carter saw the ad. Jasmine was 24 years old, and life had been anything but kind to her. She dropped out of culinary school 2 years earlier when her grandfather had his first heart attack. The tuition money that was supposed to pay for her dreams had to go toward medical bills instead. Now she worked multiple jobs just to keep their tiny apartment and pay for her grandfather's medications. Every morning, she worked at a coffee shop downtown. Her afternoon shift was at a grocery store, stocking shelves and dealing with cranky customers. And most evenings, she cleaned office buildings until midnight, her hands raw from harsh chemicals and her back aching from bending over desks. But Jasmine never complained. Her grandfather raised her after her parents died in a house fire when she was 12. Now it was her turn to take care of him. The housekeeper position at the Adams mansion paid more than all 3 of her jobs combined, and she desperately needed the money. When Jasmine arrived for the interview, she was nervous but determined. Ryan looked exhausted, his hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. He barely looked at her resume. "The job is straightforward," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Clean the house, do the laundry, basic maintenance. You won't need to interact with my daughter much, she keeps to herself." Ryan hired her on the spot. What he didn't know was that he'd just hired the person who would save his family. Jasmine's first day was quiet. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, cleaning rooms that felt more like a museum than a home. It was around noon when she heard a noise coming from the kitchen pantry. A soft sniffling sound, like someone crying. She opened the door carefully and found a small figure huddled in the corner among the canned goods and boxes of cereal. It was Paige. The little girl looked up with tear-stained cheeks, her eyes wide with fear. She was so thin it broke Jasmine's heart. Her clothes hung loose on her tiny frame, and her once bright eyes were dull and lifeless. "Hey there," Jasmine said softly, not moving closer. "I'm Jasmine. I'm just here to help clean the house." Paige didn't respond, but she didn't run away either. She just stared at this new person who didn't seem to want anything from her. Jasmine went about her work, occasionally glancing toward the pantry. She could see Paige peeking out, watching her every move. After a while, Jasmine started humming, an old gospel song her grandfather used to sing when he cooked Sunday dinner. Something about the melody seemed to calm Paige. The little girl crept closer to the pantry door, still hidden, but listening. By lunchtime, Jasmine was hungry. She looked through the massive refrigerator and found some basic supplies: bread, butter, and cheese. She decided to make herself a simple grilled cheese sandwich, just the way her grandfather had taught her when she was young. She buttered the bread carefully, layered the cheese just right, and cooked it slowly on medium heat until it was golden brown and crispy. The smell filled the kitchen, warm, comforting, and somehow magical. What Jasmine didn't know was that she was making the sandwich exactly the way Stephanie used to make it. She cut it diagonally, just like Stephanie always did, and placed it on a simple white plate. As she took her first bite, she heard the softest voice behind her. "That smells good." Jasmine turned around slowly, and there was Paige, standing in the kitchen doorway. The little girl's eyes were fixed on the sandwich, and for the first time in months, there was something other than sadness in her expression. There was hunger. "Would you like half?" Jasmine asked gently, not making a big deal of it. She cut her sandwich in half and placed one piece on a separate plate. Paige hesitated. Every instinct told her to run, to reject the food like she had everything else. But something about Jasmine felt different. She wasn't pushing or begging or making promises. She was just there. Slowly, Paige walked over to the table and sat down. She picked up the sandwich with shaking hands and took the tiniest bite. The taste exploded on her tongue, buttery, cheesy, warm, and somehow familiar. It tasted like love. It tasted like home. It tasted like her mother. Before she knew it, Paige took another bite. And another. And another. If you're enjoying this incredible story of hope and healing, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will give you chills. Jasmine watched in amazement as this little girl who had been rejecting food for months devoured half a grilled cheese sandwich. But more than that, Paige was smiling. Actually smiling. "This is really good," Paige said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "It tastes like how my mommy used to make it." That's when Ryan walked into the kitchen. He'd been in his office when he heard something he hadn't heard in 4 months. The sound of his daughter laughing. When he crept toward the kitchen, he saw something that made his knees weak. Paige was sitting at the table, eating. Not just picking at her food, but actually eating. And she was talking to Jasmine, animated and alive in a way he'd forgotten was possible. Ryan stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. His daughter, his beautiful, broken daughter, was eating. She was laughing. She was a kid again. After that miraculous moment with the grilled cheese sandwich, everything changed. Ryan immediately promoted Jasmine from housekeeper to Paige's official caretaker and cook. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. His daughter was eating, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, Jasmine arrived to find Paige already waiting in the kitchen. The little girl was still shy, still fragile, but there was something different in her eyes. A spark of curiosity that hadn't been there before. "Can you make pancakes?" Paige asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine smiled and nodded. She pulled out the ingredients and started mixing the batter, explaining each step as she went. "My grandfather always said the secret to good pancakes is not to overmix the batter," she said, showing Paige how to fold the flour gently into the wet ingredients. Paige watched intently, absorbing every word. When Jasmine handed her the whisk, the little girl's face lit up with something that looked almost like joy. It was the first time in months that she'd shown interest in anything. Day by day, their routine developed. Every morning, Jasmine would arrive and find Paige waiting for her in the kitchen. They would cook breakfast together. Sometimes scrambled eggs, sometimes French toast, always something simple but made with care. Paige would eat every bite, her appetite slowly returning as the days passed. In the afternoons, they would prepare lunch together. Jasmine taught Paige how to make her favorite grilled cheese sandwich, how to cut vegetables for soup, how to season chicken just right. With each lesson, Paige became more animated, more like the child she used to be. "Mommy and I used to cook together every Saturday," Paige said one day while they were making chocolate chip cookies. It was the first time she'd mentioned her mother without crying. She would let me crack the eggs, and I always got pieces of shell in the bowl. Jasmine laughed softly. "That happens to everyone when they're learning. Your mommy sounds like she was a wonderful cook." "She was," Paige said, her voice growing stronger. "She made the best birthday cakes. She would let me help decorate them with frosting flowers. As the weeks passed, these conversations became more frequent. Paige would share memories of her mother while they cooked, and Jasmine would listen with endless patience. She never pushed, never asked too many questions, but she was always there when Paige needed to talk. Ryan watched all of this from a distance, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. His daughter was transforming before his eyes. She was gaining weight, her cheeks filling out and her eyes brightening. She was talking more, laughing more, becoming herself again. He would stand in the doorway of the kitchen, watching Jasmine and Paige work together. There was something magical about the way Jasmine interacted with his daughter. Patient, gentle, never forcing anything. She had a gift that all the expensive specialists had lacked. But what Ryan didn't know was that Jasmine was struggling behind the scenes. Even with her new salary, money was tight. Her grandfather's medical bills were mounting, and the medications he needed were expensive. She was still working her evening cleaning job to make ends meet, often getting home after midnight and then arriving at the Adams house early the next morning. Worse than that, Jasmine started skipping meals to afford the special ingredients Paige requested. When Paige asked for fresh berries for her pancakes, Jasmine would spend her lunch money on strawberries and blueberries. When Paige wanted to make her mother's favorite chocolate cake, Jasmine bought the expensive Belgian chocolate, even though it meant she would eat nothing but crackers for dinner. She never complained, never let Paige see her struggle. All that mattered was that this little girl was eating, was healing, and was finding her way back to happiness. And Paige was healing. Every day brought new progress. She started sleeping through the night without nightmares. She began playing with her toys again, something she hadn't done since her mother's death. She even started talking about going back to school, something that had seemed impossible just weeks before. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon while they were making homemade pizza. Paige was carefully spreading sauce on the dough, her tongue sticking out in concentration, when she looked up at Jasmine with tears in her eyes. "Jasmine," she said softly, "you cook with love like Mommy did." The words hit Jasmine like a punch to the heart. She knelt down to Paige's level, her own eyes filling with tears. "Your mommy must have loved you very much," Jasmine whispered. "She did," Paige said, wrapping her small arms around Jasmine's neck. "And I think she would have liked you." It was in that moment that Ryan realized something that would change everything. He wasn't just watching his daughter heal. He was watching himself fall in love, not just with the way Jasmine had saved Paige, but with Jasmine herself. Her kindness, her patience, her selfless love for a child who wasn't even her own. But he also realized something else. He couldn't lose her. Whatever it took, whatever he had to do, he couldn't let Jasmine walk out of their lives. She wasn't just Paige's caretaker anymore. She was the missing piece of their broken family, the light that had brought them back from the darkness. The question was, did she feel the same way? And more importantly, what secrets was she hiding that might tear them apart? As the days turned into weeks, Ryan found himself looking forward to coming home in a way he hadn't since Stephanie died. But it wasn't just because Paige was getting better. It was because of Jasmine. He would catch himself watching her from the hallway, admiring the gentle way she spoke to his daughter, the grace with which she moved through their kitchen, the genuine smile that lit up her face when Paige laughed. But every time these feelings surfaced, Ryan pushed them down. What was he thinking? He was a billionaire CEO, and she was his employee. She was young, beautiful, and kind. She could have anyone she wanted. Why would she be interested in a broken widower who couldn't even help his own daughter eat? The class differences felt insurmountable. Ryan had gone to Harvard, lived in a mansion, wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Jasmine worked multiple jobs, lived in a tiny apartment, and had dropped out of culinary school. What could they possibly have in common besides their love for Paige? But those differences became the least of their problems when Jasmine's world started falling apart. It happened on a Thursday morning. Jasmine's phone rang while she was teaching Paige how to make cinnamon rolls. The caller ID showed her grandfather's neighbor, Mrs. Williams, and Jasmine's heart immediately sank. "Jasmine, honey, you need to get to the hospital right away," Mrs. Williams said, her voice shaking. "Your grandfather collapsed this morning. They're saying he needs emergency surgery on his heart." Jasmine felt the world spinning around her. The surgery would cost over $50,000, money she didn't have. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket costs were astronomical. She would have to quit her job with the Adams family and work every available hour just to make a dent in the bills. For the first time since she'd started working for Ryan, Jasmine considered leaving. She couldn't ask him for help. It wouldn't be appropriate. But she couldn't let her grandfather die either. He was all the family she had left. She was so lost in her panic that she didn't notice Cole Thompson watching her from the kitchen window. Cole was Jasmine's ex-boyfriend, a man she'd tried desperately to forget. He was manipulative, selfish, and had made her life hell for 2 years before she finally found the courage to leave him. She hadn't seen him in over a year, but somehow he'd found her. The next morning, while Jasmine was getting dressed for the day, Cole appeared in the kitchen like a nightmare came to life. Well, he said, his voice dripping with false charm. "Look who's moved up in the world. Working for rich people now, are we, Jasmine?" Jasmine's blood ran cold. "What are you doing here, Cole? How did you even find me?" "I have my ways," he said, leaning against the marble counter like he owned the place. "Nice setup you got here. Real nice. I bet your boss doesn't know about your little criminal past, does he?" The words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. When she was 18, desperate and hungry, she'd been caught stealing food from a grocery store to feed her family. The charges had eventually been dropped when the store owner learned about her situation, but the arrest was still on her record. "That was years ago," Jasmine whispered, her voice shaking. "The charges were dropped. I was just trying to feed my family." "Doesn't matter," Cole said with a cruel smile. "I bet Mr. Rich Guy wouldn't want a thief taking care of his precious little girl, would he? Especially not when I tell him how you used to shoplift all the time when we were together." That was a lie, and they both knew it. Jasmine had stolen food exactly once in her life, and it had been the most shameful moment of her existence. But Cole had always been good at twisting the truth to serve his purposes. "What do you want, Cole?" Jasmine asked, though she already knew the answer. $10,000, he said casually. "Consider it a fee for keeping your secrets safe. You've got 1 week." Jasmine felt like she was drowning. $10,000? She barely had $10 to her name after paying for her grandfather's medications. And with his surgery costs mounting, there was no way she could come up with that kind of money. "I don't have that kind of money," she said desperately. "Then you better find it," Cole said, his voice turning cold. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure your boss knows exactly what kind of person he's trusted with his daughter. And trust me, once word gets out in those fancy circles, you'll never work again." The threat hung in the air like poison. Jasmine knew Cole well enough to know he wasn't bluffing. He would destroy her reputation, her career, her entire life if it served his purposes. For the next few days, Jasmine was a wreck. She tried to hide her distress from Paige, but children are perceptive. The little girl could sense that something was wrong with the person who had become her lifeline. And just like that, Paige started rejecting food again. It started small, pushing away her breakfast, picking at her lunch. But within days, she was back to her old patterns, throwing plates and crying when anyone tried to make her eat. The progress they'd made over weeks was disappearing before everyone's eyes. Ryan was frantic. He couldn't understand what had changed. Jasmine seemed distracted, distant, like her mind was somewhere else. And Paige was regressing faster than ever. "What's wrong?" he asked Jasmine one afternoon as they watched Paige throw a bowl of soup across the kitchen. Everything was going so well. What changed? Jasmine couldn't tell him the truth. How could she explain that her ex-boyfriend was blackmailing her? How could she admit that she had a criminal record, even if the charges had been dropped? Ryan would never trust her with Paige again. "I don't know," she lied, her heart breaking. "Maybe she's just having a bad week." But Ryan wasn't convinced. He could see the fear in Jasmine's eyes, the way she jumped every time her phone rang. Something was terribly wrong, and he was determined to find out what. That's when he heard voices coming from the kitchen early one morning. Angry voices. One of them was Jasmine's, and the other belonged to a man he didn't recognize. Ryan crept closer to the kitchen door and heard words that made his blood run cold. "You've got 3 days left, Jasmine," the man was saying. 3 days to come up with my money or I start making phone calls. And trust me, your boss won't like what I have to tell him about his precious little caretaker." Ryan's hands clenched into fists. Someone was threatening Jasmine, in his house, around his daughter. That was a mistake they would live to regret. Ryan didn't hesitate. He burst through the kitchen door like a man possessed, his eyes blazing with fury as he faced the stranger who dared threaten someone under his protection. "Who the hell are you? And what are you doing in my house?" Ryan's voice was ice cold, the same tone he used to destroy competitors in boardrooms. Cole spun around, clearly startled. He'd expected to intimidate a helpless housekeeper, not face down a billionaire CEO who looked ready to tear him apart with his bare hands. "I'm just having a conversation with my old friend Jasmine," Cole said, trying to sound casual, but failing miserably. "Your conversation is over," Ryan said, pulling out his phone. "Security will be here in 2 minutes to escort you off my property. And if you ever come near Jasmine or my daughter again, I'll have you arrested for harassment and trespassing." Cole's confident facade cracked. "Look, man, you don't understand. Jasmine's not who you think she is. She's got a criminal record. She's a thief." Ryan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Get out of my house, now." "She was arrested for stealing," Cole shouted desperately as 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. "She's a criminal. You can't trust her with your kid." The security guards grabbed Cole by the arms, but he kept screaming threats as they dragged him away. "This isn't over, Jasmine. You still owe me. I'll ruin you." When the house fell silent again, Ryan turned to face Jasmine, who was pressed against the kitchen counter, tears streaming down her face. She looked like a broken bird, fragile and defeated. "I'll pack my things," she whispered, not meeting his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Adams. I should have told you about my past. I understand if you never want to see me again." "Jasmine," Ryan said softly, stepping closer. "Look at me." She shook her head, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "You heard what he said. I was arrested when I was 18. I stole food from a grocery store. The charges were dropped, but I still did it. I'm a criminal." Ryan reached out and gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You stole food to feed your family?" Jasmine nodded miserably. "My grandfather was sick and we had no money. I was so hungry and I took some bread and peanut butter. I was so ashamed." Ryan's heart broke for this woman who had saved his daughter's life. "Jasmine, you didn't commit a crime. You showed love. You sacrificed your pride, your reputation, your safety to feed your family. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of." "But I'm not good enough for you," Jasmine sobbed. "I'm not good enough for Paige. I'm just some girl from the wrong side of town who couldn't even finish culinary school." Ryan cupped her face in his hands, his own eyes filling with tears. "You're wrong. You're not just good enough, you're perfect. You saved my daughter's life. You brought laughter back into this house. You made us a family again." Before Jasmine could respond, Ryan dropped to one knee right there in the kitchen. "Jasmine Carter, I'm not just asking you to marry me. I'm asking you to be Paige's mother. I'm asking you to be the heart of our family. Will you marry us?" Jasmine stared at him in shock, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Ryan, you can't be serious. I'm your employee. I work for you." "No," Ryan said firmly, pulling out a ring box he'd been carrying for weeks. "You're the woman I love. You're the woman who saved my daughter. You're the woman who made me believe in love again." That's when they heard a small voice from the doorway. "Jasmine?" They turned to see Paige standing there in her pajamas, her eyes wide with hope and fear. She'd heard everything. "Are you going to leave us?" Paige asked, her voice trembling. Jasmine knelt down to the little girl's level, tears still streaming down her face. "I don't want to leave you, sweetheart, but I thought your daddy wouldn't want me to stay." Paige looked between Jasmine and her father, then did something that surprised everyone. She walked over to Ryan and took the ring box from his hands. "Please be my new mommy," she said, holding the ring out to Jasmine. "I love you and Daddy loves you, and we want you to stay forever. If you're not crying right now, you might want to check if you have a heart." Make sure you subscribe because this story is about to get even more beautiful. Jasmine looked at this little girl who had become her whole world, then at Ryan, who was offering her everything she'd never dared to dream of. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll be your family." But their happiness was short-lived. 2 days later, Cole returned with a vengeance. He'd hired a lawyer and was threatening to sue for defamation, claiming Ryan had damaged his reputation by having him removed from the property. He also threatened to go to the media with Jasmine's arrest record. This time, Ryan was ready. He'd spent 2 days having his legal team investigate Cole Thompson, and what they found was explosive. Cole had outstanding warrants in 3 states, a history of domestic violence, and a rap sheet that made Jasmine's teenage mistake look like a parking ticket. When Cole showed up at the mansion again, he found himself face to face with Ryan's security team, a police officer and a lawyer armed with enough evidence to put him away for years. "You have 10 seconds to get off my property," Ryan said calmly, "or you'll be arrested for violating the restraining order I filed against you this morning." Cole's face went white. He looked around desperately, realizing he was trapped. "This isn't over," he mumbled, backing away. "Yes, it is," Ryan said. "It's very much over." Cole was arrested that afternoon for violating the restraining order, and with his criminal history, he was denied bail. Ryan made sure he would never be able to hurt Jasmine again. 3 months later, they had the wedding. It was small and simple, held in the garden of the Adams mansion. Paige was the flower girl, wearing a white dress that made her look like an angel. Jasmine's grandfather, recovered from his surgery thanks to Ryan's generosity, walked her down the aisle. As they exchanged vows, Jasmine promised to love not just Ryan, but Paige as well. And Paige, in a moment that brought tears to everyone's eyes, promised to be the best daughter she could be. 6 months later, their house was filled with new kinds of joy. Paige was healthy and happy, back in school and thriving. She had gained all her weight back and then some, her cheeks rosy and her eyes bright with life. Jasmine was pregnant with their first child together, and every morning she and Paige would cook breakfast while planning the nursery. Ryan would watch from the doorway, his heart full of gratitude for the second chance he'd been given. "What do you think the baby will like to eat?" Paige asked one morning as they made pancakes. "Whatever we make with love," Jasmine replied, her hand resting on her growing belly. "That's the secret ingredient, remember?" Paige nodded seriously. Love makes everything taste better. And she was right. Love had transformed their broken family into something beautiful. It had turned a desperate billionaire and a struggling young woman into partners, parents, and soulmates. As Ryan watched his pregnant wife teaching his daughter to cook, he realized something profound. Sometimes the people who've struggled the most have the biggest hearts. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the smallest acts of kindness. And sometimes, when you think all hope is lost, a miracle walks through your kitchen door. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.